Welcome back. So today we're doing something a little bit different. We are flying out in DCS once again, and since the Phantom is right around the corner, and I'm very excited about it, I figured I would start making some more, DCS related videos. I wanted to start playing it again. I haven't been on there in a couple of weeks. I've been busy with other things. So today we're flying out one of the, maybe less common subjects, the C130. So we're on the Gray Flag Sinai server, and I realize I haven't really put out a ton of DCS content outside of like the F-15 or the Jeff or whatever, right? So, I usually fly fixed-wing planes. I do have helicopters. I do fly them from time to time, but I'm terrible. I can't land. My landing in a helicopter looks really alright up until we're about 10 feet off the ground, and then we explode. But one of the things that's really important on Gray Flag is seizing territory. And the way you do that is by putting troops into capture circles. Well, I can't really do that with a helicopter because I can't land it. I mean, every once in a while I manage to land it, but what I can do is I can fly a C130. And the C130 you can absolutely fill with things that you can put on the ground to capture these locations. You can carry all sorts of vehicles that you can airdrop, and you can carry infantry. And you have to get a little bit creative if you want to use the infantry effectively. Well, let's say a little bit creative, but it's more gimmicky, I guess. But we'll get there once we're closer to the drop. So we're taking off out of Telnoff, and we're going to be headed out towards El Goro. The area's mostly been pacified, but there is some stuff left on the ground that'll end up shooting at us here and there. I don't think it's a whole lot of radar-guided guns or anything. I think it's mostly like technicals and BMPs and whatnot. Like I said, most of the area has been pacified, and this actually is probably my third flight out with the C-130. Initially I was concentrating more on taking the coastline, but that part of the front line pushed, and so now I was working on the area next to it. So, most of flying the C-130 works fairly well. Bear in mind, this is a community mod, so it's not fully completed, and my understanding is upon the announcement of the full fidelity module, work on this mod pretty much stopped, so there's a lot of little gaps in it, and there's a lot of things that are partially there that don't quite work. So all of the important stuff works. Like, you can load things, you can unload things, you can airdrop things, you can take off, land, pop flares, all that works. The navigation works somewhat, but it's not perfect, and the autopilot works pretty well. But, for example, you can carry bombs on here, you can equip it to be a C-130, and there are multiple stations that you can switch to inside of it. It's just not everything is fully functioning. So, like, ideally there would be a battle station and, like, a targeting pod and things like that. There would be, like, an automated drop system. None of that works. So, like, you could put the AC-130 modules on, but actually hitting anything with it, it's just not realistic. You're just looking out the side of the plane, and you can't even really aim most of it. It's just that functionality was never completed. For example, you can also put Moab in here, and the Moab is awesome. I absolutely love it. The problem is, without the battle station, a targeting pod, or any sort of, like, drop assist, it's very, very difficult to get it to land where you want. And I understand, it's like a 5,000-pound bomb, I think. It might be bigger than that, but the point is, I understand, it's a very, very big bomb. And it probably doesn't matter too much if you get it right on target, but at the end of the day, you still need to get it close enough. And when you're just looking at the map or going in third person and trying to look down to drop it, it doesn't really work so well. So while I would love to use those features more and just use this thing like a strategic bomber, the fact of the matter is, I kind of can't. And some of the flights for the C-130, because, it's a prop plane, and it's a large, fat prop plane at that, can be a little bit slow, but there are times when I want to, take it easy in DCS, and I find that this is the perfect plane for it. It's kind of like if you've ever played Elite Dangerous, or Star Citizen, or EVE, and you just feel like chilling, so you go and you do trade runs, or you go and mine, or whatever, just something like that that's less intense. And don't get me wrong, dropping troops can be intense. It's definitely more intense than just being a bus pilot, because that's another thing you can do on Grey Flag. You can pick up crates of weapons and whatnot, and you can drop them at airfields and farps to make sure that the friendlies are staying supplied and whatnot. So this is a little bit more engaging and a little bit more hostile than that. So my first few times trying to do this in a C-130, they actually weren't super successful, and a lot of that came down to me not knowing the parameters in which to drop things and not having the right cargo loaded. So, going into that, you can drop cargo in one of two ways. There's either air cargo or there's skid cargo. Now, if you've ever watched any of the real-world clips of, a C-130 dropping off at an APC or whatever, right? The way they normally do it is on skids, and so they'll fly really low to the ground, and they'll fly pretty slow, and it'll basically slide out the back with a parachute, and it'll slide along the ground for a while. And that's one way that you can do it. It's just not the way that I do it, because, to be honest, most of the places where I fly these, I know I'm going to get shot at somewhat. And even though the damage model in this is not very great, and so it could take a lot of punishment it probably shouldn't be able to take, I still don't want to get that low and that slow. So normally, if I want to put vehicles on the ground, I'll bring the air version, because it means that I can actually airdrop it, and then I'll bring infantry. And infantry are really the bread and butter of my playstyle with the C-130. And the infantry come in blocks of 30. So, in order to drop things, in order to drop the infantry, for example, you need the first 2 slots of cargo to go out first. So when I'm getting ready to go into drop, what I'm going to do is be somewhere between 800 and 1200 feet at no more than 145 knots. I try to be around 140 knots. And so in order to do that, usually when I'm about 10 miles out, I'll line up with my drop zone. I know that makes me really predictable, but because we're not dealing with real players, I don't have to act too squirrely or whatever. So I'll usually try to line up 10 miles out, and we'll rig the plane for an airdrop, so cargo doors open, jump doors open, deflectors on, and we'll try to get our altitude between 800 and 1200 feet at about 140 knots. And we'll probably go down 2 ticks of flaps. That's just the way that I do it. I don't know if that's the correct procedure, or if, you probably could do it with less flap. But that's just how I usually do it. And so usually, because the navigation aids aren't perfect in this, they're not really displayed on the HUD the way I would like them to, I usually use a combination of glancing down at the navigation console to my bottom right, which will give me a heading and a distance, and then I also look at the F10 map, and sometimes I'll go into third person. It really depends. I could do it without the F10 map, and I could do it without third person. It just probably wouldn't be as accurate, and to some extent, the infantry will walk to a target zone. The vehicles, I think you need the player to actually take control and drive them in, though. So usually that's how I'll set everything up, and usually it'll go alright. The only other thing to be aware of, if this is something that you want to attempt, is that if you go to drop your infantry, it's going to drop all 30 of them, and realistically, you don't need 30 infantry in a zone. I mean, maybe if they're fighting or whatever, then maybe you want them there, but I like to try to get a little bit more bang for my buck out of it. And so, like, with the helicopters, a lot of the helicopter groups that drop off, I think, are like 10 dudes, give or take. And so, what I'll usually do is I'll come in and I'll start the drop for the infantry. And then while the infantry are dropping, partway through, I'll close the side doors and that'll cut the drop. And so, once it cuts the drop, you can immediately reopen them. And then, if your next drop zone's like right up ahead, you're already ready to go. You can just tell them to jump again and they'll jump. And so, you can do that for multiple drops. And that makes it so that you're a little bit more useful and you get a little bit more mileage out of your airdrops, because if we're being entirely honest here, this is a slow process. Like, if you spawned in a helicopter, you would spawn closer to the front and you could probably make like 2 trips at least in the time it takes you to make one of these. But like I said, I suck at flying helicopters. It's something I'd like to be better at, but it's just not something that I'm good at. I get myself stuck in a vortex whenever I try to land. I'm just bad. Now, coming in here, or seeing the drop that we just did, you'll notice sometimes we get shot at, sometimes it gets a little bit spicy, but like I said, the damage model isn't fantastic in this plane. At one point when I was flying, I had one of my engines light on fire, but the damage model isn't great. So even though I pulled the fire extinguisher on it and shut down the engine, that was more just for me. The damage model isn't good enough for me to actually need to do that, but I think it's kind of fun and thematic to do it. But all of this is to say, I am very much so looking forward to the real full fidelity module of the C130, because I can do all sorts of really cool things with this modded C130, and having one that actually has full functionality for everything, actually has like automated drops, actually has a battle station, all that, actually has a damage model. I look forward to that. But hopefully this has given you an idea of some of the alternative playstyles that you can have in DCS. I know not every server has the C130, but I love that we do have it on Grey Flag. It gives me something kind of neat and interesting to do from time to time that isn't just dropping bombs on people or chasing down enemy fighters. I don't personally have the combined arms module, but to be honest, airdropping LAVs has kind of made me want to get it so that I can like airdrop an LAV and then go land and take control of it and go and take an area. It just seems like it would be a neat thing to do. You wouldn't necessarily think just by looking at a C-130 that it would be a particularly interesting plane to fly, but it's just these little things that you can do with it, dropping infantry, getting shot at by AAA, all that. I just think it makes it kind of fun. That, and it's a very easy plane to fly. Mind you, there isn't any sort of like auto startup for it, but the startup procedure is pretty simple. You just flip a few switches and turn a few knobs, and Bob's your uncle. The navigation computer also, even though it's, you know, pretty basic and not everything's like linked into it, it works pretty well. You can name you can name a waypoint, and then you can plug in your waypoint. It's like the Air Force standard format. So same as how you type it into the F-16 or the F-15 or the A-10. So with my drops complete, I ended up heading back to Telnoff. We flew back on 3 engines, which admittedly wasn't ideal, but it's got 4 engines, that's what the extra ones are there for. And yeah, it was a pretty comfortable landing. All things considered, I think the thrust reverser in this actually works phenomenally well. It's another one of those features that the way that you use it doesn't quite feel right, but that's because you use a keybind for it instead of just like moving the throttle into that position. But it works very well. You can. One of my favorite things about the C130 is that you, with the Rato system, you can take it off in an absolutely tiny area, but then you can also land it in an absolutely tiny area. Like it comes in and I think it stalls around like 80 knots. So you're already absolutely crawling when you stall. So yeah, you can land in a very small area. It's got a pretty quick turnaround time because of that. So you can get on the ground very quickly. You can slow down relatively quickly, and then you can get right back in the air. And it doesn't take forever. It's not like some planes where you have to use the whole runway. So I'm looking forward to the F4. It should be out right around the corner. I cannot wait. Expect videos about it. As per usual, get out there, kick ass, take names, and win your games.